Hello and welcome to yet another master session of Making Health Matter, an open knowledge initiative from Ogilvy, India. On this platform, we invite people from healthcare to come and share with us their learnings and their experience in everything healthcare. The topic we have taken today is healthcare marketing, local, regional, and global. And to share with us his learnings and his experience, we have with us today Aalok Agarwal. Aalok is Senior Vice President and General Manager Consumer Healthcare at Procter & Gamble. He's based out of Singapore. I will introduce Aalok through his words. Aalok says his goal is to serve 2 billion consumers and patients in the Asia Pacific, India, Middle East, and Africa region with superior yet accessible healthcare solutions. Aalok believes that everybody deserves good health. Aalok is the regional business head and general manager with over 20 years of experience in consumer goods and consumer healthcare industry, bringing a growth mindset to business and organizations. Aalok has a history of leading success and innovation in diverse regions, including Asia, North America, and Europe, and diverse organizational cultures. He is also serving on the board of directors at Procter & Gamble Health Limited, formerly known as Merck Limited in India. Outside of work, Aalok is a non-stop traveler, a news hound, and a dad to a girl who he says is growing up only too quickly. Let's welcome Aalok. Thank you for making it happen, Aalok, and welcome to Making Health Matter.
My pleasure. Great to talk to you, Rana.
So, Aalok, we'll dig into your experience, your learnings. You've been across all the continents, if I may say so. You've been in US, in Europe, and in Asia, and you've practiced healthcare marketing across the continents at levels of local, regional, as well as global. And that's the experience I'd like to dig from you. And I'm sure a lot of our listeners would actually gain from that knowledge. So we will cover the healthcare ecosystem as well as the healthcare consumer. And let me deep dive into the very first question of the healthcare consumer itself. Across the geographies, if you see the healthcare consumer, is there some difference? Is there some similarity? How do you see that?
Sure. So when it comes to the healthcare consumer, we see a lot of similarities. I would say 70 to 80% maybe sometimes is even the same, and then 20 to 30% is always different from a local cultural context, history, nuance standpoint, right? So firstly, the needs are very common. I mean, whether you look at people who want cough, cold relief, or you want to sleep better, or you want to have more energy in your life and your body, and those are all the same, and so or you have an iron deficiency. So those are all the same, and we find that there's quite a few common consumer needs across markets, which allow us to also think about our products and our offerings in terms of more scale. And the same time, there's also things like more recent trends. So consumers all across the world are more aware, more interested in taking control of their own health. They want to be more empowered. That's another broad mega trend, yes, because of which a lot more consumers are doing searches. I mean, even doctors like to joke now that everybody thinks there's a doctor in them, and because they've all done their Google search and shown up at the doctor's clinic saying what about this and what about this. So you see some of those, more common trends, which I think are allowing, patients to feel more empowered in their own way. At the same time, I think there are some, significant differences that we see so in our own portfolio on Vicks, in particular, which is our largest brand in the portfolio. In some markets like India, South Africa, even the Philippines, we have local habit of steam inhalation, which is when you get cough, cold, and certainly in the COVID period, this was a very popular remedy that people turn to. But this was again very specific to certain markets and certain contexts where maybe historically tradition or otherwise, or people grew up with it. So certainly we did a lot to amplify Vicks Vapor Rub during that time in those specific markets. We also tested in some others, but you couldn't take a sort of very common approach. You had to really tailor it for the market, and approach it accordingly. Another one in also in Vicks in Indonesia, there's this local traditional belief that bad wind can enter the body, and that causes kind of cough, cold, and so there's a practice called kerokan, which is where they actually rub a coin or any metal object in a certain pattern on the body
Wow.
to take out the sort of bad wind, as it were. And so that's called Masukangin. And so again, we launched an idea on Vicks Vapor Rub, which was around doing this Masukangin or doing kerokan through Vicks Vapor Rub rather than through this painful kind of coin rubbing thing. And again, that has really grown the brand there as well. So again, I would say long and short is, there are a lot of common factors, but as well, you need to understand the local context. And so we like to try and do as many, be as regional or global as we can, but with local amplification wherever possible.
So that's really interesting when you see that across the countries they will have these local practices, and that could be really, really interesting.
Absolutely.
Second thing you talked about was globalization. I guess globalization of healthcare. I was actually intrigued in knowing that are there certain markets which are actually behaving more with the excitement of globalization and the others are a little reserved. But what I guess you're saying is 70% of the behaviors are common, and that's very interesting. That's very interesting, which I guess allows for brands to therefore pursue a regional or shall I say, a global agenda. Right.
Yeah, and thinking about it as kind of a common platform, and then from there, there's obviously going to be some differences, but we find, there's even more in common than there is different sometimes. Yeah.
Interesting. Alok, I'm going to shift from the consumer to another aspect, which is distribution, the retail and distribution. Frankly, right. In healthcare, it was something which is like, it's so set in the mind, at least that's what we in India think so. It's so set in the mind that it's only pharmacists. But I think this is a place which has had a significant amount of transformation coming about in the last decade or so. But I guess with COVID, everything has got amplified. And so must have happened here too. Tell me, especially in the context of e-pharmacies burgeoning of late, across these geographies, what's the context of traditional versus the newer formats of trade from a healthcare standpoint?
Sure. So I think in the region in general, as we look across the region and even globally, I mean, the drug pharma channel or drug pharmacy channel remains very much the go-to channel for healthcare shoppers, right?
Sure.
And I think even through COVID, I think played a massive role in making sure that consumers and patients had access to medicines. In fact, in many cases, I mean, pharmacists or pharmacy shops were one of the only shops that were even open. And at personal risk, actually, that they had to kind of take in order to continue to make those products and medicines available. Now, within that, the drug pharmacy channel, though, has many different formats across the region, right? So in markets like Australia, Singapore, Philippines, Saudi, and I would say even South Africa, there's a lot of what we would call more modern retail pharmacies or chain pharmacies. I think there's some of them are emerging in India now as well. But this is, a little bit more, there's a large self-select format, and then you have one, area which is specifically for either prescription medicines or medicines where, the pharmacist needs to dispense the product. So at the same time, there are markets like India, Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia, which are much more heavy on standalone independent pharmacies and a lot of what we would call small format or self or behind the counter pharmacy stores. So your typical chemist shop in India would be that. So again, this plays a big role in designing everything from how we cover the store, the way we plan our visibility initiatives, the number of people in the store that you need to influence in terms of pharmacists and others. all of these are important. What's important across this format is certainly that the commitment to win with pharmacists as a partner, I think, is they're an integral part of the healthcare system, and in many cases they're the first line actually that most patients would kind of turn to for anything, right? So they're well positioned, and they have the credibility and knowledge as well there. So we tend to participate and partner, I think, significantly with them, making sure that we can educate them about conditions, about our products, and at the same time to help them to serve their patient needs better. The other trend through both COVID, but also was emerging anyway, I think, was e-commerce, of course, or e-pharmacies. And healthcare has probably been a little bit late to the party in this space, but we've seen increasing e-commerce adoption in healthcare, and certainly it varies by category. In vitamins, you see a much quicker adoption. You don't need it the next day or something. You're willing to wait a few days. You tend to kind of stock up. It's okay if you keep it for a while. At the same time, in acute conditions, like you've got a cough, cold, you would rather need the product immediately.
Right away.
You might err on the side of going down and just getting
Sure.
it from your local chemist, right? So some differences across categories, but in general, we're seeing pretty significant growth there. And then at the last one, of course, there are certain markets where you've even liberalized medicine availability to outside of pharmacies.
Correct.
Now, this still is a smaller part, and it tends to be in certain markets. But again, we are where the shopper is. So if the shopper is out, and the regulations allow the products to go outside, of course, we follow them there as well. So that's broadly the landscape. But I would say drug pharmacy and e-commerce or e-pharmacies are probably still the mainstay and very much a growing channel for us.
And just a follow-up question to that, Alok. So obviously this trend is supposedly global, but there will be some markets which will be a little ahead in terms of going from just traditional to e-pharmacies. Case in point, India is one of the, I won't use the word early because you'll be in the best place to tell us, but I think the adoption has been significant. Are there other markets which are ahead, faster? Are there markets that are slower than India in your observation?
Yeah, I would say India's middle of the pack actually. I mean, I wouldn't say India is very far ahead or behind. In general, you see markets like Germany where up to 15-20% of the market is now in e-commerce. The traditional used to be called mail pharmacies, and they've converted themselves into kind of e-pharmacies. In the US, up to 30% of the vitamins business can be online as well.
Yes.
So in India, the numbers are a little bit more muted. Not to say again, there's varies by category as I mentioned.
Sure.
But there are some other markets where the customer landscape is not developed to the same extent. Now in India with you've got the NetMeds and the Pharmeasies of the world and others which are leading the development of this segment, where those customers don't exist, and the channel doesn't develop as fast. So we have a number of markets in, let's say, ASEAN as well, which are less developed from an e-commerce perspective.
So, Alok, now given the fact that the healthcare ecosystem, you said there's a lot of commonality and the trends are rather similar, but yet there will be differences, right? So when you wear the hat of a regional versus global, how does your approach change? In what way do you look at globalization or regionalization from a marketing standpoint, given this ecosystem and given these variations? How does a person handle these variations? How do you approach them?
So I think there are a number of different principles that we use. I think one is common where possible and different where needed and justified, right? So I think we start from the approach of making sure that we don't assume that it needs to be different everywhere, and then we kind of because that if you look for the differences, you'll find them, and then you kind of over design for them. The second, then we tend to use certain design markets. So again, for the purposes of really either qualifying the initiative, whether it's a commercial innovation or a product innovation, and then using those as so we within a region, though, we can have multiple design markets as well. So it's not a kind of single country necessarily. But we tend to use those to sort of work it. And then, as we said, it's kind of regional scale with local amplification is how we try to then do the toolkits and the marketing plans, so that we do have that common kind of core. We might have a common campaign, but then executed slightly differently in each market. Certainly, the production shoot kind of $1 million question of, okay, do you do one with 6 talents, or kind of do it market by market? All of those decisions then kind of come down.
For sure.
Of course, local key opinion leaders and influencers whom we would then work with by market to really amplify locally and create that local credibility in terms of the messaging. I think we did a lot of that for steam inhalation as well. So those are the kinds of things that we would typically do. But again, I would say it's very situational, and it's very, very much a case by case basis. We don't, you try and apply just this one kind of, general rule of thumb, and
Sure.
the whole thing breaks down. I think it becomes a bit too, it can't manage all the scenarios that are possible.
For sure, for sure. No, in fact, that's a segue to the question that I was about to ask for P&G, and you've actually answered it well to saying the common. I think there's an interesting construct that when you search for commonalization right across every aspect, so that you don't have to over customize. I like the word of saying you don't have to overthink about differences. Otherwise, you will land yourself up in an issue to do very many more things. But then if you were to way back, and I'm going to ask you to wear your local hat, that while at a regional level or at a global level, you will find this and you will develop toolkits. What's your approach to local P&G in the local markets? What's the kind of flexibility? What's the kind of approach that the local marketing teams have?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of, as we said, the approach is kind of regional scale and local amplification. So starting with a kind of consumer need and insight, the brand benefits typically takes the shape of a common campaign idea or communication
Sure.
idea. We have typically a regional toolkit and a playbook for brands, for our campaigns, for even healthcare practitioners. And these are then worked with the markets kind of in an iterative way, right? And then from there on, the markets would typically turn to localize, execute, and amplify these. So they would work trial plans. They would have key influencers or key opinion leaders, local insight-based activations, the in-store activations, any sort of PR, public relations efforts. So we had kind of a few and there's a brand called Sangobion, which we have in the region, and which is an iron deficiency anemia supplement. So we had a common kind of campaign idea around break free from anemia, which kind of chains
Yes.
you up in a sense. And Indonesia and others, they actually did a number of local activations, which allowed us to engage with audiences in a much better way. We actually measured it, and those had those local amplifications actually in many cases had even higher scores than some of our regional work. Now it's a different format, so it's hard to compare them apples to apples.
Sure.
But
Sure.
in general, we believe the 1 + 1 = 3, and we're the combination of the two worked very well. In the Philippines, we had a kind of local celebrity, so we actually did the same campaign where we shot it with her to make sure that we had again that local relevance. Slowmag is another. It's the magnesium-based supplement which we have in South Africa, and there's a kind of regional program called or campaign idea called Beat Your Slump, and they had a local influencer activated campaign, kind of like this whole COVID kind of brought us in a sense into what we would call a slumpdemic, right? Sort of, focused on, in a sense, uh, made us less active, right? So again, and so we wanted to sort of take that on and really get people back out again, get them outdoors again, and get them fully recharged again. And so there's a number of different executions that we worked with, all of which were locally activated, which we've seen good success with. And so for most of our big brands and big programs, we try and make sure we work the communication idea far enough in advance such that there's enough time for this local amplification to really take life.
So I'm going to come to the last question, Alok, here, and that's for the whole lot of excited marketeers who would be interested in healthcare, and possibly more number of people who are interested in PNG healthcare. But let's just take a step back and say, for the new youngsters who are coming on board and are excited about healthcare marketing, what are the 3 mantras you would actually say that this is how he should prepare himself for marketing, be it at the local, regional, or global level, and how does he get himself ready for this new emerging healthcare world?
Sure. So, what I'll start with first is, again, and this may seem like I'm repeating myself, but marketing fundamentals tend to be quite similar across categories. I would say, again, 70 to 80% is actually the same. So it's not that, especially on the consumer healthcare side. Now, if you're in kind of the RX world, it's a slightly different scenario. But in consumer healthcare, you do have 70 to 80% of marketing fundamentals being the same. The 20 to 30% that's different in healthcare is really a function of things like the regulatory environment, the influencing pharmacists and doctors where needed. And those factors then, of course, and the path to purchase in some cases has more influencers versus your straight out, okay, I advertise to a consumer and they go pick it up in a supermarket. So I think even the things I'll talk about, I suppose you could argue they may or may not be specific to healthcare, but I consider them my more broad mantras for any marketer. So I think one was this idea of, if you want to play the game, play to win, right? I think this, too often in marketing, we tend to play not to lose sometimes. And so if you're playing, that's one thing I've learned in my career. I've been through a few situations where you really, at the end of it, you look back and say, were we playing to win or were we playing not to lose? And so I think sometimes our attitude, beliefs, and actions in a particular situation, make us run really hard, but you feel like you're in a treadmill. You're exactly where you were when you started. And some, recognizing that early and being able to change that approach, I think, can allow you to work in a way that can help you really move forward, and sometimes we've assumed some constraints or shackles which may not be really there. So that would be one that I've seen certainly being really critical. The second I would say is this whole idea of be hungry for learning. I think even after 20 plus years in healthcare, I still learn something new every single day. It is a vast industry. There's so many different models. There's so much to learn. And so, this idea that you're going to somehow in a year or two master it all, and then, it doesn't really happen. You need to be humble enough that, you're on this constant kind of learning journey. And the more curiosity you have, the more you are a student of the industry day in, day out at any level, whatever level you may be at, whether it's entry level or a CEO, I think that's where you'll continue to, grow, develop, and sort of maximize your impact, right? So that would be the second. The third, I think, is for me, marketing and winning is really about is teamwork. Is rarely ever achieved in silos, right? Whether it's an agency partnership, whether it's a partnership with pharmacists or now influencers or the whole ecosystem, or frankly within your own organization, with R&D or with different functions, consumer insights. So building those partnerships and connections early, and nurturing them. I mean, through your career, and is really for me a critical success driver. I think the more you will, it maybe links back to the second one, but the more you feel like I know it all and I'm going to find the solution, the more likely you are to fall flat at some point. You may have a few wins before, but the long, the way to really be successful in the long run is to have that early teamwork, those partnerships, those connections, socializing your ideas, having people build on them. I think that has a power which we consistently see. It drives longevity of success. So those would probably be my top three.
Lovely. In fact, I love the way you stated play to win versus play not to lose. I thought that was incredible because that's exactly what the whole thing is, that how many people want to stay average? If a person's asked, no, I don't want to be. But the fact is, therefore, if you don't want to be average, what are you doing? I love the first one. Hungry to learn. Here's an interesting thing, Alok. I do not know whether it's only after experience one realizes that your hunger has to be there. Because in the earlier years, I think the whole belief is, listen, I know everything. So it's interesting to say, I hope people don't wait as long as some of us tend to do, to say, hey, maybe hunger would have been a good idea earlier. Because I think over time, a successful person will figure that one out. And I love that point. And teamwork, I couldn't agree with you more. I thought that's a fantastic three set of mantras that you've given for the youngster. And I think when you talk about them, it is actually preparing for the, when a person says emerging world of healthcare, one can look at it from changes. But I don't think, or let me put it the other way around. The three mantras you've given is irrespective of the change that happens. I think they are the most fundamental in themselves, which helps a person do so. Thank you so much for doing that for us, Alok. This was a fantastic session, and I have to tell you, I am sure the listeners and the viewers of this program are going to learn. But even I have learned quite a bit from from this sharing that you've done. Really, really appreciate it, Alok, to have done this session with us.